Hey, let me check in with William Shakespeare's Richard II, which I have only read this time. I have not watched a production of it. Usually I kind of make a point of finding one on YouTube, and actually there's a couple on YouTube that I could watch. But so far I've read the play, and I've listened to a couple of little lectures on it. One from Emma Smith, one from Shakespeare and Politics guy whose name I cannot remember right now, but I've kind of listened to like the first part of his one of his lectures on it. Um, it's I think it's an interesting play in that Richard II really feels the character really feels like he is in a tragedy. Sounds very Hamlet at times, whereas a Bolingbroke who will turn into who having deposed Richard II will turn into Henry IV very much sounds like he is in a history play and is a lot more realpolitik. Though, as you find out, just hints at the beginning, and that Richard isn't all just like kind of uh, kingly king. He's been doing some dirty stuff too. He seems to have had a hand in the uh, the killing of Woodstock, one of the other kind of barons, lords of this kind of more medieval society, which seems with Trollope is not Trollope with Shakespeare, we're kind of getting a transfer from the divine right of kings, of like, inherited from God kind of king, to more, no, here is another fellow who is good at stuff, good at being a king, and he's actually better at being a king, so he's going to be the king now. That sort of thing. Um, but it's also a play that really is dominated by this weak. I mean, Richard. It's interesting. Richard II is not a good king. He seems kind of vacillating and stuff like that. But his language that Shakespeare gives him, he gets all the big speeches. He gets all the, let us sit and talk of, let us sit and talk of kings, or I don't get me trying to quote Shakespeare because I'm shit at this. But he gets all the big speeches. He gets like a big, long soliloquy, very kind of, it does seem kind of Hamlet inwardness at a couple of points, especially scene 5, act 5, before his death. So he kind of dominates it that way, while Bolingbroke sort of dominates the history of, let's shuffle this guy off. And in the end, we open with a king that seems to have been implicated in the murder of a lord, and we end with a different king who seems to have idly mentioned, "Oh, will no one rid me of this troublesome king?" Very much kind of an echo of kind of what happened to Thomas Becket, apparently, with a king kind of pondering like, "Oh, who will get rid of this darn archbishop for me?" And so one of the chancellors does, and indeed in this play, one of the chancellors does, and then for his troubles gets banished for it. But very much, but it's also, and he's going to, uh, Henry IV is going to make the proper kind of show actor show of doing pilgrimage, but I don't think it's seen more as a political penance to solidify his power than it is maybe actual penance, or you get that kind of performative thing. And there is striking one thing where the two of them, both Richard II and Bolingbroke to become Henry IV, are entering London, where they're described as actors, and that Bolingbroke is the more magnetic, capable actor, and Richard II is the poor actor who kind of comes on afterwards, that everyone's like, okay, now we've got to listen to him. He's kind of tedious after the great actor on board, which isn't to say that, like, obviously whoever who's actually doing the acting of Richard II, who would have to be really have the chops because you got the big speeches. You are the title character, but um, Bolingbroke is the good political, military kind of actor of this of history, whereas Richard II is kind of an also ran who gets carted off. But it's reminds me of one of these things of someone saying, it's like, well, what's this thing with royalty? It's the genetic lottery. You might end up with like a great king, like um, Elizabeth I, or you might end up with like someone who's inbred, insane, or just completely kind of hopeless. And Richard II is one of these guys of, he wasn't actually supposed to be the king. It was supposed to be the Black Prince who was supposed to become king, great military leader, but he ended up dying. So it ended up being Richard II, as a little kid, inheriting it and getting kind of bossed around by a bunch of nobles. And now he's kind of, now we're getting into that point where it's like, well, I need to shuffle off some of these barons so that I can take control. But it doesn't work out that way, and one of those barons does decide that they are indeed better at it than he is. And so yeah, it's an interesting play. um, Emma Smith talked about it as, is this, who has the right to be king? And is it Richard II, or is it Bolingbroke, um, or Henry IV? But probably, so you can also take a look at it from a more just Machiavellian point of view, which is what the power, the Shakespeare and politics guy is assigned. And it's like, well, Shakespeare himself might not be a complete subscriber to Machiavelli. He does sort of see those kind of operations happening in the world of power, and how there's within the play, there's implications that there's been discussions off stage of like, oh, like when when Richard II banishes them at the beginning, there's implication that there's been a bit of backroom dealing and kind of horse trading to kind of come up with this decision. And so it's one of these, like, it's not a nightly thing where people like joust and we're going to do everything out front. It's like, no, things happen in the back rooms. There's real power politics going on here. And Shakespeare is obviously somebody who's really fascinated with that and sees how much that has an influence on a life, and how um, that can be a real positive force in this world. Um, so yeah, interesting. And there's the whole thing of like the history plays. Is this just a way of saying, oh, it all leads to the Tudors? But there's also implications that a play like Richard II has been used a couple of different ways contemporarily in his time, of this whole thing of deposing a king. Deposing a king was not really, was a pretty dicey thing, and indeed conspirators who were trying to get Elizabeth I off, um, or get her advisors off, um, were did actually commission the players to pull out this, at that point, older play now and play it. And they got hauled in like, well, what's your part in all this? And luckily it didn't come of anything, and nobody got uh, got turfed. But it's just one of those, it's a play where a lot of different ideologies are able to kind of pour themselves in and see different ways about this play, and how you interpret Richard, how you interpret Bolingbroke. Is Richard, is he weak? Is he vacillating? Um, is Bolingbroke venal? Is he going to turn out to be just sort of the same sort of a king as Richard II was? All interesting stuff. I'll keep on thinking about it before I actually make a proper video.